I had an additional thought about the Titanic submarine, the Titan. First of all, Mr. Beast posted this tweet. I want to bring this tweet up. Mr. Beast posted the following tweet. It's a screenshot, or a partial screenshot of a text message conversation he had with someone. He didn't say who this text message was with. But he said, I was invited earlier this month to ride the Titanic submarine. I said no. Kind of scary that I could have been on it. Now, Mr. Beast is the most followed person on YouTube for anybody who was unaware of this. Look at how many impressions are on that tweet alone. 50 million people saw this tweet. This is actually very typical of a Mr. Beast tweet. It's very typical of a Mr. Beast YouTube video. He has the second most viewed YouTube video of all time after the Will Smith slap of Chris Rock, I believe, holds the all-time record on YouTube. And the screenshot of the tweet, or the screenshot of the text message that Mr. Beast tweeted is from someone that said, also, I'm going to the Titanic in a submarine late this month. The team would be stoked to have you along. And I have to imagine that that is really jarring to be in Mr. Beast's position, to see the tragedy of the loss of the lives of those people that were on that submersible, and to realize that, dang, that could have been me. That we in the West often feel invincible because we live pretty safe, secure lives. We don't suffer tragedy that often. I think that's one of the reasons why pretty much every person in our country was just watching, riveted to see the updates on whether this submersible would be rescued, whether they could find contact with it, or whether it had imploded as it did and the people died as they tragically did. But the thought that I had about this is I find what these people did in this by going on this submersible, and I mean this with all due respect, I know that they've died, I find it to be incredibly foolish. I said this last week. I can't fathom looking at that submersible and thinking that it was a safe and wise and prudent decision to go on this, right? It seemed incredibly reckless, and not just reckless like, oh, I'm in a Jackass movie. If I, flip over my motorcycle, I might break my leg. Not just reckless like that, like reckless with human life. Like all the way to the extent of life and death, like very reckless. They had a whistleblower at Ocean Gate quit because he said the stuff that they were doing was not safe. There was James Cameron of Titanic, of the director of the movie Titanic, said, and he's like in the submersible industry. He said people in the industry wrote letters to Ocean Gate warning them about the safety criteria that they were failing to meet and warning that they would have a tragedy like this. And Ocean Gate neglected, they ignored it, and this is what happened. So it seems incredibly reckless to me that you would go on a journey like this, that you would get into a vehicle like this and go into the deep sea, which is a very dangerous place, without any safety and security protocol. And there were some people on Twitter, it was Matt Walsh specifically that I saw, and he was scolding those of us who were saying that this seemed really reckless and foolish, that anyone would get into a submersible like this. He was saying, what happened to the respect that we used to have for exploration, the respect and reverence we used to have for explorers who were willing to risk their lives just for the sake of exploration? And I kept thinking about that over the weekend because I thought, is that accurate or is that not accurate? And I realized that's not only inaccurate, it's actually wildly, wildly wrong. Because two things. First of all, explorers of old, like say Magellan, right, did not embark on their dangerous journey without first spending sometimes years preparing for every contingency to mitigate the risk to himself and his men should something terrible happen, and they anticipated that the terrible things would happen. So these explorers that went on these journeys, or take NASA, for example, right? NASA is probably the most modern equivalent to the explorers of old. How many years do these astronauts train for every contingency? How often are these rocket launches canceled over the slightest thing wrong in order to protect the human life that is being risked in this exploration effort? So it's not the same thing. It's not equivalent in and of itself, because this submersible did the opposite. This was not a highly trained crew. This had not been pre-tested. This was not something that was a safe vehicle. And the idea of exploration is not actually what was happening with this submersible. Exploration like NASA, or exploration like Magellan, or exploration like one of these explorers of old, was exploration in pursuit of something that would serve the greater good, something that would be in the interest of society at large, that would better people's lives. It was a sacrifice, not recklessness. It was a sacrifice of, well, it could have been a sacrifice of people's lives, and sometimes it was. It was a sacrifice for something greater than oneself. That is something to be admired. That is something to be respected. We need people who are courageous and prudent and understand that there are things bigger than the individual. But that's not what happened on the Submersible. These people were not prudent. They were not prepared. It was not secure. They were not anticipating contingency in a way that, or anticipating stumbling blocks and bad things happen, friction. They weren't anticipating friction in order to preserve human life. They were being reckless with that, but they also weren't exploring for something that would benefit society. They weren't risking their life in pursuit of something that would serve the greater good. They weren't doing something bigger than themselves, opposite of that. They were going just for fun. They were going so that they could have a story around at a cocktail party. They were going perhaps actually to inflate their own ego so that they could say they did something that not a lot of other people could do to serve their own vanity. And again, I don't mean this with any disrespect, because I know that they died, and it's tragic, and I'm sorry that they died. But it's also not correct to label these people and what they did as heroic when what they did was reckless and foolish and perhaps even selfish, because it ultimately cost them their lives to do so. Hi guys, it's Liz Wheeler. Don't forget to watch my show, The Liz Wheeler Show, every night at 7 p.m. on the First TV. You can download the free First TV app, or you can visit thefirsttv.com/Liz and start watching today.